In the pantheon of modern Greek tragedy, few stories rival the profound sorrow and isolation that has defined the life of Athina Onassis, the sole surviving heir to one of the world's most famous shipping fortunes. Born into unimaginable wealth, yet cursed by an almost mythical pattern of loss and betrayal, Athina's existence reads like a contemporary Greek drama, complete with family curses, courtroom battles, and the crushing weight of inherited grief. Her story is not merely one of privilege and luxury, but of a young woman who has spent her entire life navigating the treacherous waters of fame, fortune, and the seemingly inescapable destiny of the Onassis name. Athina Onassis was born on January 29, 1985, in Neuilly-sur-Seine, France, inheriting not just a vast fortune, but also a legacy steeped in tragedy and public scrutiny. She is the daughter of Christina Onassis, the troubled heiress who struggled throughout her life with depression, addiction, and tumultuous relationships, and Thierry Roussel, a French pharmaceutical heir whose relationship with Christina was marked by distrust and conflict from the very beginning. The circumstances surrounding Athina's birth were already fraught with complexity. Christina Onassis, despite her immense wealth, had lived a life marked by profound unhappiness. She had witnessed the deaths of both her brother Alexander and her legendary father Aristotle Onassis, experiences that left deep psychological scars. Her marriage to Thierry Roussel was born out of desperation for companionship and her desire to produce an heir, but it was a union built on shaky foundations. Christina never fully trusted Roussel, suspecting him of being primarily interested in her fortune rather than genuine affection. From the moment of her birth, Athina was thrust into a world where love and money were inextricably intertwined, where genuine human connection was perpetually overshadowed by questions of inheritance and financial motivation. The child who would one day inherit hundreds of millions of dollars was, from her earliest moments, surrounded by adults whose relationships were complicated by greed, suspicion, and the corrosive effects of enormous wealth. The defining tragedy of Athina's early life occurred when she was just 3 years old. In November 1988, Christina Onassis died suddenly in Buenos Aires at the age of 37, officially from a pulmonary edema, though many suspected that her death was the result of her long-standing struggles with prescription drug addiction and depression. For little Athina, this loss was catastrophic, not merely because she lost her mother, but because it marked the beginning of a pattern of abandonment and instability that would characterize her entire childhood. The death of Christina Onassis was more than a personal tragedy for Athina. It was the moment when she became the sole heir to the Onassis fortune and the last surviving member of a dynasty that had captivated the world's imagination. At 3 years old, she inherited approximately 55% of Aristotle Onassis's vast shipping empire, making her one of the wealthiest children in the world, but also one of the most vulnerable. Following her mother's death, Athina was placed in the custody of her father, Thierry Roussel, but this arrangement brought little stability to her young life. Roussel had been having an affair with a Swedish model named Marianne Gaby Landhage during his marriage to Christina, and after Christina's death, he moved Athina to live with him and his mistress in Switzerland. For a child already traumatized by the loss of her mother, being forced to live with the woman who had been her mother's rival added another layer of emotional complexity and pain. Athina's childhood was marked not by the carefree play typical of most children, but by an atmosphere of constant legal warfare and emotional manipulation. Her father, Thierry Roussel, as her guardian, controlled her vast inheritance, but his management of both her fortune and her upbringing became the subject of intense scrutiny and legal challenges from various parties, including the Onassis Foundation and other family interests. The young heiress grew up in a world where every relationship was potentially compromised by financial interests, where she could never be certain whether people sought her company for genuine affection or for access to her fortune. This environment of perpetual suspicion and legal maneuvering created a fortress of isolation around Athina, making normal childhood friendships and experiences nearly impossible. During these formative years, Athina was shuttled between various luxurious residences, educated by private tutors, and kept largely away from public view. While other children were learning to navigate playground politics, Athina was being schooled in the harsh realities of wealth management, legal proceedings, and the bitter dynamics of family feuds played out in international courtrooms. The psychological impact of this childhood cannot be overstated. Athina learned early that her value to others was largely defined by her inheritance, that her relationships would always be complicated by questions of financial motivation, and that the adults in her life were more interested in controlling her fortune than in nurturing her emotional well-being. These lessons would shape her approach to relationships for the rest of her life, creating a general feeling of mistrust that would prove difficult to overcome. As Athina approached her majority, the legal battles surrounding her inheritance intensified. The conflict was not merely about money, though the sums involved were staggering, but about control, identity, and the future of the Onassis legacy. Various parties, including her father, the Onassis Foundation, and other interested entities, engaged in complex legal maneuvers to influence how her fortune would be managed and how she would be prepared for her role as one of the world's wealthiest individuals. These legal proceedings were conducted largely in secret, behind the closed doors of Swiss and international courts, but their impact on Athina was profound and public. She was forced to navigate a maze of lawyers, trustees, and financial advisors, all while trying to establish her own identity separate from the massive fortune that defined her in the eyes of the world. The complexity of these arrangements was staggering. Her inheritance included not just liquid assets, but shipping companies, real estate holdings around the world, and various business interests that required sophisticated management. The question of who would control these assets until Athina came of age, and how they would be transferred to her, became the subject of prolonged and bitter litigation. Perhaps, as an escape from the suffocating world of legal battles and family drama, Athina found solace in the world of equestrian sports. Show jumping became more than just a hobby. It was her pathway to a sense of normalcy and achievement that had nothing to do with her inherited wealth. In the stable and in competition, she could be judged on her skill, dedication, and partnership with her horses rather than on her bank account. This passion for equestrian sports would become central to her identity and would eventually lead her to the most significant relationship of her young adult life. The world of international show jumping provided Athina with a community where, while her wealth was certainly known, her abilities as a rider were what mattered most. It was a space where she could compete and excel based on her own merits rather than her inheritance. Her commitment to the sport was serious and professional. She invested heavily in top-quality horses, training facilities, and coaching, approaching show jumping with the same intensity that her grandfather had brought to building his shipping empire. In many ways, the discipline and focus required for elite equestrian competition provided Athina with the structure and purpose that had been largely absent from her childhood. However, even this refuge was not without its tragedies. The sudden death of her horse, named Camille Z, during a 2014 competition in Italy, after collapsing post-round, became another source of grief for someone who had already experienced far too much loss in her young life. The incident served as a reminder that even in the pursuits she chose for herself, away from the world of inheritance and family drama, tragedy seemed to follow her. In late 2005, shortly after turning 20, Athina married Brazilian Olympic show jumper Álvaro de Miranda Neto, Doda, in a civil ceremony in São Paulo, followed by a religious ceremony earlier that year. The marriage represented Athina's first real attempt to build a life based on her own choices, rather than the circumstances of her birth and inheritance. Álvaro was himself an accomplished athlete, an Olympic medalist who had earned his reputation through skill and dedication rather than inherited wealth. For Athina, this relationship must have seemed like an opportunity to connect with someone who understood her passion for show jumping, but who also brought his own achievements and identity to the relationship. The fact that they shared the intense, demanding world of international equestrian competition provided a foundation for their relationship that went beyond the usual complications of her wealth. Their wedding was a lavish affair, but it was also notably private, reflecting Athina's consistent desire to keep her personal life away from public scrutiny. The couple settled into a life that revolved around their shared passion for show jumping, traveling the world to compete in prestigious events, and building what appeared to be a genuine partnership both in sport and in life. For 11 years, their marriage seemed to offer Athina the stability and companionship that had been so elusive throughout her childhood and young adulthood. They competed together, traveled together, and built a shared life that was defined by their mutual interests rather than solely by her inheritance. To outside observers, it appeared that Athina had finally found a way to create a normal, loving relationship despite the extraordinary circumstances of her wealth and family history. However, the fairy tale that many observers hoped Athina had finally found proved to be another cruel illusion. In what would become one of the most publicized and bitter divorce proceedings in recent memory, it was revealed that Álvaro had been conducting a secret affair with a Belgian model for approximately 8.5 years of their 11-year marriage. This betrayal was not merely a personal devastation for Athina, it represented the collapse of what may have been her most genuine attempt to build a life based on trust and mutual respect. The discovery of her husband's infidelity was particularly crushing because it confirmed Athina's worst fears about the motives of those who claimed to love her. Here was a man who had seemed to offer genuine partnership, who shared her passion for show jumping, and who had his own professional achievements independent of her wealth. Yet even he had been deceiving her for the majority of their marriage, maintaining a secret relationship that made a mockery of their vows and partnership. The betrayal went beyond simple adultery. Álvaro's affair had been conducted with apparent callousness, with reports suggesting that he would often receive phone calls from his lover while with Athina, and that his behavior had become increasingly distant and irritated over the years. For someone who had grown up surrounded by suspicion about others' motives, this betrayal must have felt like the ultimate confirmation of her worst fears about human nature and the impossibility of genuine love in her circumstances. The divorce proceedings that followed were as complex and bitter as anything that had characterized Athina's earlier legal battles. Álvaro's lawyers challenged the prenuptial agreement that Athina had wisely insisted upon, demanding significant alimony payments and attempting to claim a substantial portion of her wealth. The case involved not just financial considerations, but also custody disputes over their jointly owned horses, adding another layer of emotional complexity to an already devastating situation. The legal battle was conducted primarily in Belgian courts, where Athina had been residing, and it dragged on for over a year. The proceedings revealed the depths of the deception that had characterized the marriage, with evidence presented about the long-standing affair and the various ways in which Álvaro had betrayed his wife's trust. The case also highlighted the particular vulnerabilities that come with extreme wealth, as Álvaro's legal team attempted to argue that he was entitled to compensation for the lifestyle he had become accustomed to during the marriage. Throughout these proceedings, Athina demonstrated a steely determination to protect her interests and to refuse to be victimized by someone who had already caused her such profound emotional harm. Her legal team was able to prove the extent of Álvaro's infidelity, and ultimately, the divorce was settled in November 2017 on terms that were highly favorable to Athina. Reports suggested that Álvaro received virtually nothing from the settlement, a result that reflected both the strength of the prenuptial agreement and the court's recognition of his betrayal. The failure of Athina's marriage and the bitter divorce that followed represented more than just another relationship gone wrong. It was the latest in a long pattern of loss and betrayal that had characterized her entire life. From the death of her mother when she was 3, through the complex and often hostile relationship with her father, to the ultimate betrayal by the man she had trusted with her heart, Athina's life had been marked by an almost mythical consistency of disappointment and grief. This pattern of loss has created a defensive shell around Athina that has made subsequent relationships extremely difficult. Having been betrayed by virtually every significant figure in her life, she has understandably become increasingly reclusive and suspicious of others' motives. The woman who was once hopeful enough to marry for love has become someone who guards her privacy and emotions with fierce determination. The psychological impact of this repeated pattern of abandonment and betrayal cannot be understated. For someone who inherited not just wealth, but also a family history marked by tragedy and early death, each new loss must feel like confirmation of some kind of family curse, a destiny from which she cannot escape no matter how much money she possesses or how carefully she tries to choose her companions. Following her divorce, Athina has retreated into an increasingly private existence, rarely appearing in public and maintaining a lifestyle that is characterized by careful anonymity rather than the ostentatious display often associated with extreme wealth. She has made strategic investments, including a significant stake in a French supermarket chain, demonstrating that she has learned to manage her fortune with intelligence and caution. Her rare public appearances are carefully orchestrated and brief, such as her attendance at a wedding in Monte Carlo in 2024, where she appeared elegant but reserved, wearing simple clothing and maintaining the low profile that has become her signature approach to public life. These glimpses of Athina reveal a woman who has learned to navigate her wealth and fame with discretion, avoiding the kind of publicity that made her family members targets for gossip and speculation throughout their lives. The contrast between Athina's current life and the more flamboyant existences of her grandfather Aristotle and her mother Christina is striking. Where they courted publicity and lived their dramas in the public eye, Athina has chosen the opposite approach, seeking privacy and anonymity as protection against the various predators and opportunists who have taken advantage of previous generations of her family. At nearly 40 years old, Athina remains the sole surviving direct descendant of Athina Onassis, carrying the weight of one of the 20th century's most famous family legacies. The Onassis name, which once represented the pinnacle of wealth, glamour, and international influence, now rests entirely on her shoulders. This responsibility extends beyond mere financial stewardship to questions of how the family legacy will be remembered and whether the Onassis name will continue into future generations. The pressure of this legacy is compounded by the tragic history that has preceded her. Her grandfather Athina Onassis, despite his enormous success, lost his son Alexander in a plane crash and died a broken man. Her mother Christina struggled with depression and addiction throughout her short life, never finding the happiness that her wealth should have provided. Her uncle Alexander died tragically young, and even her step-grandmother Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, despite her grace and intelligence, could not escape the shadow of tragedy that seemed to follow the family. For Athina, the question of whether to have children and continue the family line must be complicated by this history of loss and the knowledge that any children she might have would inherit not just wealth, but also the burden of being Onassis heirs in a world that has shown little mercy to her family. The decision to remain childless, at least thus far, may represent a conscious choice to allow the family curse to end with her generation. Despite the personal tragedies that have marked her life, Athina has proven herself to be a capable steward of her inherited fortune. Her business decisions have been marked by intelligence and caution, avoiding the kind of flamboyant investments or lifestyle choices that have destroyed other inherited fortunes. Her stake in the French supermarket chain, led by a former minister in Emmanuel Macron's government, represents the kind of solid strategic investment that demonstrates her understanding of wealth preservation and growth. Her approach to her fortune reflects the hard lessons she has learned about trust and dependence on others. Rather than relying entirely on advisors and managers, she has taken an active role in understanding and directing her investments. This independence is crucial for someone who has learned through bitter experience that even those closest to her may have ulterior motives. The fact that she has managed to preserve and grow her wealth while navigating multiple legal challenges, a bitter divorce, and the various attempts by others to gain access to her fortune speaks to a strength and intelligence that may not be apparent to casual observers who see only her reclusive nature. Athina Onassis's life represents a modern Greek tragedy in the truest sense, complete with themes of fate, hubris, and the inexorable working out of family curses across generations. Like the heroes of ancient Greek drama, she has been burdened with a destiny that seems largely beyond her control, forced to navigate a world where her greatest asset, her inherited wealth, is also the source of her greatest vulnerabilities. Whether Athina will eventually find a way to build genuine relationships and perhaps create a family of her own remains to be seen. Her story is still being written, and there is always the possibility that she might yet find the happiness and peace that have eluded the Onassis family for so many generations. But for now, she remains what she has been for most of her life: the lonely guardian of a vast fortune, the last survivor of a dynasty, and a living reminder of the truth that money cannot buy the things that matter most in human existence. Her legacy, whatever it ultimately becomes, will be that of a woman who survived when others in her family could not, who learned to protect herself in a world determined to exploit her, and who carried the burden of enormous wealth with dignity and discretion. In a world that often celebrates ostentation and publicity, Athina Onassis has chosen a different path, one of quiet strength and determined privacy. Whether this path will ultimately lead to happiness remains the final chapter in a story that has already provided more than enough tragedy for several lifetimes.